us an overview of how successful job applicants should proceed.
Well, going back just a bit to what I mentioned before, the first thing that you have to do is make sure your references are in order. 15, 20 years ago, it was okay on your resume to put references available on request. Don't ever do that in a resume. Don't do that. Because what you're saying to the employer is, I have references, but I'm not going to tell you who they are, which is silly. If you have them, put them in the resume unless the job announcement tells you specifically not to. Make sure that you have your references lined up well ahead of any time you're going to be searching for a job, because I know, having had students come to me and ask me for a letter of reference, the one thing I don't like, and I know this is true for almost everyone, I don't want someone to come to me and ask me and then tell me I have to have it to them by 5 o'clock that afternoon. You do this well ahead of time. The other thing is that you need to ask for these references the right way. Often people just say, well, you know, this isn't rocket science. You just ask the person that you know, would you write me a letter of recommendation? The problem with that question is that it's too easy to say yes to. So I tell people, watch the body language and the reaction of the person you ask for your letter. Do they shuffle around and shift their eyes and say, yeah, well, I can? Or do they look you in the eye and say, I'd be delighted to write you a letter? It's a completely different kind of reaction. Mm-hmm. If you're getting that shuffling, eye-wandering sort of an answer, don't use that letter. And the reason is fairly simple. It can absolutely submarine your job chances. If you're a new graduate, you have a placement file on campus, that letter, which you cannot see, it's a confidential letter, goes into your placement file and it will stay there pretty much forever. Or if it's a letter that's confidential, going directly from the person you asked to write the letter to the institution, you cannot see that letter either. And if the person is kind of ambivalent about you, that can absolutely sabotage your job chances. So be absolutely certain that you ask the question like, would you have a problem writing me a very strong letter of recommendation? And then watch how they react. If they react positively, that you've let them know what kind of a letter you want, and they have smiled and said yes, they would be happy to do that. You can pretty much be sure that that's going to be a much better letter than the person who's going to be shuffling around and being ambivalent about it. The next thing to do when you see the job announcement is get out a highlighter and highlight all the qualifications. There will be minimum qualifications which you have to meet. If you don't apply. The preferred qualifications are the ones they would love to have, right, but they recognize not everyone is going to have all of those. So I've been asked a lot, if I don't have one of those preferred qualifications, what do I do? And I say, if it's just one, don't do anything. Don't mention it. Because your job is to tell them what you can do, not what you can't do. However, if there's 6 or 7 of those that you can't match, then maybe this is the wrong job for you. But in any case, you highlight them, because what you're going to do is when you write your letter of interest, your cover letter, you're going to cover all of those things in your cover letter. You're going to connect the dots between your qualifications and what you have actually done so that they don't have to connect them. You've got to do that. That's your responsibility as an applicant. Do your research on the institution, on the people there. If you can find out who's on the committee, if it's a committee situation, who's going to interview you, find out everything you can about that place you're going to apply to. When you walk into the interview, you should know more about that institution than the people who work there. You have to do that. You have to do the homework. You have to be prepared. And then above all, practice the interview questions before you go. If you get the interview, you spend hours and hours and hours writing a question on one side of a card, answer on the other, give it to somebody else, and then you practice that over and over and over again. If you walk into your interview that prepared, you'll be confident. If you walk in there thinking, I'm just going to wing it, it will sound like it, and that's a good way to lose a job, is not be prepared. So those are basically the things that need to be done before you can get to the